Hello, everybody. Oh. Hello, everyone. No? Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Drew Kennedy, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging country tonight. So tonight we are here at the Museum of Sydney on Gadigal land, and I'd like to acknowledge all community elders, past and present, and anyone here tonight, and anyone joining us online. The First Nations Speaker Series is an ongoing series through a partnership that is Sydney Living Museums, GML Heritage, and the Research Centre for Deep History at the ANU. Tonight we are privileged to have Hayden Walsh speak. Hayden is a proud Wiradjuri man and is currently the First Nations Advisor at Sydney Living Museums. Hayden will be speaking about how to create change within organisations and within ourselves. Hayden will reflect and speak around the way in which cultural institutions can provide their engagement and connection with First Nations peoples and community. We'll have some time for questions at the end, so for everyone here in person, if you just remain seated, and Sam will run our questions and you can just call them out. And for anyone watching online, please just drop your questions in the chat throughout Hayden's talk, and we'll get to those at the end. So please welcome Hayden.
All right, good evening. Thanks, Drew, and thanks everyone for coming out. It's always beautiful to be here at the Museum of Sydney on Gadigal land, and I'm Wiradjuri through my mum's side and my nan's side, but the last few generations we've grown up around the Gadigal and Wongal area, so a lot of my connection is felt here in Sydney. So it's always a privilege to work across this great part of the world, and I really appreciate everyone coming out tonight. I know it's live stream, and I appreciate people watching online as well, but to come out tonight, I really, it means a lot, because I know there's so many other things that we could be doing and be distracted by, but I think that these type of conversations and these type of discussions are really important. If you think culturally, the way we would pass knowledge and stories, and we still do, is through that those oral histories and through just talking and yarning and the power of the spoken word. How I'm always amazed by how someone can just say one thing that could completely change the way you look at the world or look at parts of society, and how that can then go on and change the way you live and work. So hopefully, no pressure, but hopefully I have a few of those tonight. But it means a lot. So I also want to acknowledge a lot of people that have helped me get to this space. I'll talk a bit later about some of those teenage years and a lot of those people that helped me then. But just professionally and culturally, the ones that have helped me learn and grow and really take things to the level that it's at now. And without those teachers and mentors, I wouldn't be anywhere close to doing anything that I do now. So I want to acknowledge all of them. And just before we get fully started, can just get a raise of hand, how many people here work in a cultural institution or some type of community organisation? Okay, cool, you're all in the right place, that's great. And what about young people? So just raise your hand if you've got, maybe you have a child or a grandchild or a niece or a nephew or just a young person that you care about somewhere in your life. Beautiful, talking to the right crowd. We're going to have a great night, because those are the two areas that we're going to really focus on. So just a little bit of a roadmap. I downloaded Canva, which is like this mad PowerPoint 2.0, so I got a little bit creative with it. So you'll see some weird slides throughout the night, but just a little bit of a roadmap of where we're going to be for the next 40 odd minutes, and then leading into questions. So just starting a bit more about me, so who you're listening to, and you can make your minds up after that. And then spending quite a bit of time talking about cultural institutions, and in particular museums, which is where I spent a lot of years working. So we'll unpack a lot there and look at some of the work I've done with our First Nation strategy at Sydney Living Museums, but also just things that I've seen across the sector. It's a very small world, particularly in those sort of cultural roles. So people talk, people know what's going on. So after a while in this space, you start to see the patterns and the common occurrences are different. workplaces, and you see what's working and what's not. So we'll unpack all that. And then moving into the youth programs, which is a business and organisation that I started when I was 19, and looks at the well-being of young people and providing them with world-class personal development. And then looking at how we can work together. So some of you may be interested in even not working, just having a yarn. We can look at that, and I'm always up for a good yarn and to learn and to share and to listen. That's the thing in my day-to-day life. For anyone that knows me, I'm a very deep listener, and I will listen to you and hear everything that you're saying. I really enjoy connecting with people through listening. So tonight I'm on the other side, which will be interesting. But like I said, I just hope that when you leave here tonight, that you'll pick up a couple of things that you can just go back and think, oh, in my personal life or in my work, here's how I can go about it in a different way, or this made me think about this. So some type of value like that would be my goal for you all tonight. So just a little about my upbringing culturally. My nan, she's recently passed, but she was very proud about her culture, but also simultaneously in this way had a lot of that fear and shame from her younger years growing up. So I always knew like our family history and all of that, but it wasn't until sort of those early teenage years when you start to like in year 5 and 6 when you start to unpack some of those identity topics in class. And I remember saying like, oh yeah, my dad's side's sort of English and European, and mum's side and nan's side Aboriginal. And I remember the very next recess, so that was probably 9:30, and by recess I was in the handball courts, and this kid just said, ha ha ha, we stole your land. And the ironic thing is that the truth telling in that is, you have a lot of older generations that would deny that, and then you've got this 11-year-old kid who's speaking the truth, but obviously with the tone, it was meant in a certain way. And I remember in that moment I could sort of either shrink and just sort of hide and just sort of, like, for a lot of people those type of moments are the complete, they stunt your growth culturally just from that. And I know a lot of people who've had those type of things or those type of comments, and then they never felt strong enough or safe enough to re-enter that part of their identity. And it's very, very sad. Anyway, I remember in that moment I could either sort of hide it and bury it, or I can sort of just defend myself and all of that. And I clapped back. I said a few things, but nothing as bad as what he said. But it was just at that moment when I realized that that part of my identity could open up those type of wounds, which is pretty scary. Anyway, going to school around some of these Sydney high schools at the time, there wasn't a lot of Aboriginal students, at least that were identifying. It's changed a lot now, which is good. But I didn't get to have those cultural upbringing experiences that a lot of other people have. So there was gaps in who I was in that part of me. And I'll fast forward. I'll tell a little bit about those middle years later on. But in my 20s, I was in a much better place culturally. But one of the reasons why I wanted to work more in the sort of arts and museums and gallery sort of part of the workforce is the opportunity I got to learn from some amazing people. A big shout out to Marcus Hughes, who he worked at the Powerhouse and took me under his wing and mentored me and showed me all the best practices in working with community, and also how to exist and operate in these type of cultural institutions when just the nature of how they're set up. Being able to shadow him and watch him daily was everything for me. I was able to see his strength, how he would handle certain things, and how he would bring culture into these places that weren't always warm and welcoming to begin with. So I got to work with him for a couple of years, and then moved into the museums, Sydney Living Museums. I'd also worked prior to that at a couple of smaller museums across Sydney, but they're the two biggest ones that have made the most impact on me. In terms of my museum background, I've had quite a few different roles. So like, visitor services and being a guide and also a volunteer. So right on the ground, that experience, with the visitors in the flesh, seeing what people are talking about and what their reactions are when they come into different exhibition spaces, different programs, which is really valuable because sometimes you get some staff sort of further up the top who have incredible skills, long list of skills, but maybe they haven't been on the floor with the people for quite a bit of time, maybe ever. So to have that in my sort of toolkit was really special. And I came over as the First Nations program producer for SLM, and being able to put on these festivals and these workshops and these public programs was great because, again, just being there, experiencing it, seeing what community, what the response was and what people wanted to be a part of. And in my recent role as First Nations advisor, it's a more strategic role. So, one of the things that, was the main delivery for me was the First Nations strategy, which is online, but we have some physical copies tonight. But that was something that I think we really needed. It's very easy to do a million different things in this space, especially when you're passionate and a lot of people want to see change and want to get on board. So you'll start to see a lot of places across the space do just anything and everything because they just want to get going. But I really thought we needed a strategy to really guide us over the next 3 years to just keep us on track and just have a real point of focus because it's too easy to go in a million different directions. And then also the community engagement and relationships angle, which has been sort of a part of all the different jobs that I've had. These are just some photos that I had on hand of some of the festivals and things we've done. A lot of them are from the Eel Festival at Elizabeth Farm. But one of the things I love about these type of programs is how experiential they are. Something that saddens me quite a bit is you go to things across Sydney, particularly around NAIDOC Week and that sort of thing, and they're very commercial. I've been to some, I won't say where, but there was, Ferris wheels and all this weird stuff. There was free hats from some bank, and there was, a plastic footy and all this weird stuff. And it was like this wannabe sort of Easter show experience. And you sort of had to look very hard, like Where's Wally or whatever that book is, to try and find the cultural experience at these events. So when I was, putting on these festivals and producing them, and I'm not saying they're perfect or anything, but I really wanted to make sure that people came and experienced culture. So instead of buying a whole bunch of stuff and leaving with, sugar, kids hypo on sugar and show bags and all this sort of stuff, I wanted them to leave with memories with elders, with knowledge holders, learning language, listening to poetry, weaving. We sort of looked at all 5 different senses, of the body and making sure that was all catered to. So you sort of had this holistic experience. And also the relationships you make along the way is the most important. I've made a lot of great friends and mentors, like I mentioned. But those are the things that really, warm your heart and keep you going. But the most important of all was my nan. And, she came to every single program. And she always got there way early. It was a little bit stressful because she'd get there at 9 for like a 10 start. And I'd sort of have to give her the VIP treatment beforehand. But, she came to every single one. And for someone like her who, she was often moved to tears by the end of the festivals. Because for her, she looked at the early years in her life and, the last few years, and she could see such a massive difference in society, in people's approach to, wanting to learn more about culture. So here she is, in her late 70s, remembering times of getting bullied and getting picked on and all this trauma, with her family, being affected by the stolen generations and that. And here she is now seeing the other side, seeing the different approach, seeing the world that we're starting to build and live in. So I only really cared about what she thought about the programs, but obviously I did care about everyone else. But she was the number one judge, and she would have told me if things were bad. We were posing on the photo on the left, but the one on the right was actually like a candid photo that a friend took, and it means a lot to me. And you know, she was always that driving force for me, and still is. So these are the things that drive me to do the sort of work that I do. The strategy, I won't talk too much about it because you can read it online and you can read it in the flesh, but you know, there's quite a lot there. I wanted to make it very warm and welcoming. It's much better in the physical form as opposed to a slideshow, but I've got a lot of great feedback from it, and a lot of great staff and community went into supporting it as well. But it's something that we really needed, and it's something that can hopefully inspire other places to do their own. And I wanted to write it very uniquely and from the heart, because I'm sure many of you have seen the countless sort of strategies and action plans out there, and after a while it can seem to start to sound the same. So I put a lot of heart and soul into it. But some of our guiding principles across our staff and across our properties and the work that we do, you know, is first people's first. And what that means is, depending on the scenario, you know, it could be something as simple as when you're building a program or any type of, you know, just some type of big project, that it's First Nations people and community and content and whatever it may be is factored in from the start. Too often, so many times it comes in at the end, it's tacked on at the end, it's really wishy-washy, it's tokenistic is the word we all know. But when you get it in from the start, you can actually really build meaningful outcomes, and you can take the necessary time that's needed to do a lot of this work. And the second being be proactive. You know, it's very easy to get caught up in excuses of why things don't move along, particularly in larger sort of government type organisations, and just holding people accountable to be proactive, to keep things moving forward at a solid pace is really important. And then deep listening, which I mentioned earlier, but too often meetings, you know, and I don't mean any place in particular, just the nature of the world we live in, people talking over one another, people not truly listening, or they're listening but they're just waiting to say what they want to say. So having deep listening as a guiding principle is really important. It's part of our culture, but more importantly, it's a way that we can unpack a lot of these conversations and really be heard in these places. And the last is to seek and speak truths, because you know, we're in a much more positive time in the country, and often it's easy to just want to get to the good stuff, get to the harmony sort of esque type of days, but there's still a lot of stories, still a lot of things to unpack that a lot of community and a lot of elders haven't had the chance to get out there yet. So to not shy away from some of those challenging topics and conversations, I think is really important, and to really welcome it. And just lastly, and you know, goes into it in detail in the strategy, but just 4 focus areas that we really focus on is, you know, first is our experiences. So what are the kinds of opportunities we're providing our audience with? You know, are we putting on the Easter show type of thing, or are we giving them real, solid, tangible cultural experiences? And are we doing things that are unique to us? You know, we have 12 historic properties with really, you know, I'm sure a lot of you here have been to some of them, and you know, they're all very unique in their own way, and they're spread out across different community groups. And there's that's often our biggest challenge, but once we get things going right, you know, it can be our biggest strength. So I think it's an exciting aspect for us. And the second being knowledge and perspective. So, you know, really embedding those knowledges across all the work that we do. You know, it's good to have the big festivals and the big days of experiences, but what do people experience when they come into, you know, your quietest property on a quiet Tuesday? Are they still getting, you know, cultural knowledge and perspectives in their experience? And that can be brought about through a range of things depending on the site. And the next is access and outreach, which is a big one because historically there's a massive barrier and gap between cultural institutions and First Nations groups. And this is not just in this country, but around the world. You think about a lot of museums in particular, they house a lot of objects that were often stolen, taken from communities. And, that's part of that repatriation work that's going on around the world, which is great to see, where they're being given back to the rightful owners and families. But that divide often remains. So you'll see, often you can put things on that attract other groups of society, but your local First Nations people and communities might not be that interested in it. So how do we make it as warm and welcoming and accessible for them to come in and experience? So we're not just putting on things about their culture, but with them, together, and a place where they can practice culture, across our sites. Another thing just that ties in with outreach, and we'll get into it a bit later, but the way that connecting with culture can really strengthen well-being. There's heaps of studies, and not just here, but around the world, but when you connect more with your community and your culture and your background, it keeps a lot of people away from darker, harder paths in life, whether that's addiction, violence, trouble with the law. Even myself, my life has always gotten better and stronger and healthier the more deeper I've, been able to engage with culture and build relationships with elders. It's so obvious to me now that that's such a massive cure for a lot of the things that I was struggling with when I was younger. And last is people and relationships, which is again what it's all about. And not just the First Nation staff having the relationships with community, but I like to be a bit of a bridge between the two and connect people together. A lot of the staff at our museum that work across these festivals, they've developed relationships with Uncle Wes, one of the greatest elders and greatest knowledge holders I've ever come across. Just turned 100 years old, so you can imagine the kind of wisdom and experiences someone like him would have. For nearly or over half his life couldn't vote, so you can sort of it's so hard to fathom. But for someone like him, it's just part of his life, and he can unpack a lot of those things. I've been talking to him quite a lot over the years, and it's amazing. He's got new stories all the time, just never runs out. Normally if you get close with an older person, you start to hear the greatest hits over and over, but he's always got new stuff, so it's amazing. So next I want to turn to where do we go wrong in cultural institutions. I want to be very clear, I'm not talking about any place in particular. It could have been places I've worked at over the last 7 to 10 years. It could have been things that I know my friends and colleagues at other institutions are facing. But a lot of these, are really common, and once you start to notice them, it really hits you. And thanks to the mad PowerPoint, I got it all on one slide. This was going to be 10 other slides. So I've got it all on one, but the first is recruitment. So anyone who's ever gone for a government sort of job, it's a job in itself just for that one application usually. It's like a 6-hour assignment, rushing for the deadline. Half the time the system, crashes at 11:59. It's just really, it's harder than it needs to be. And particularly when you're trying to reach, groups of people that, maybe the first time engaging with a platform like that. I think there's easier and better ways to bring staff on, and it puts a lot of people off. Even for seasoned vets in government, for 30 years, I know people that still don't like the process of applying. So you can imagine if someone for the first time, they can just go, oh, forget it. Or you can start to think, oh, I'm not going to get it anyway, why bother? So there's so many easier ways to just bring people in and have that conversation about a possible role. I mentioned Marcus earlier at the Powerhouse, and I never formally did all these applications and all of that for when I started working there. There was other pathways that he had put in place, not just for me, but for all of the First Nations roles that popped up across the museum. And just seeing how easily that worked and how simple it was and the results that came from it, it's amazing more places don't adopt that. But I will say that it is getting better, and I've seen a lot of places start to improve that. So that's positive. Another thing is the interview location. So maybe you make that application a bit easier. But what's the interview scenario like? Is it really confrontational when it probably doesn't need to be? Is it 3 or 4 people staring down the barrel at one person's soul across the boardroom, a massive desk, you know what I'm talking about, and 2 meters away on a massive desk? And look, a lot of roles don't need that kind of situation. There's much more easier, better ways to go about it, particularly when you're bringing someone in for their cultural knowledge and to build relationships and to connect. It's not always the best way to start. And another one is not clear on what the work is. So sometimes places will put up roles just because we've got to get a cultural role in, we've got to do this and that, and then 6 months in, what the applicant was sort of sold on changes completely, and the day-to-day work and nature of the role is something entirely different. And when you're working in culture, that's massive, because it could mean the difference between something that you're really comfortable with and something that's just way left field for you and makes you uncomfortable. Second is cultural safety. High stakes. I talk about this a lot. Let's say I was just a family producer. I put on programs for kids, right? General audience. If I put on a program and let's say it's not good, or I used the wrong people, or something went a bit dodgy, you get maybe a few negative reviews and a couple of people not happy with the experience. But you can sort of, as a producer, you could bounce back from that, put something on again later in the year, and you can sort of go through without too many scars. If you're in a cultural role and you go about things the wrong way, you rush a project, you don't talk to the right people, you don't put things in the right way that they're meant to be, that can carry with you long, even after you change organizations 2 or 3 times. So it's these high stakes that you're almost gambling with every time, that a lot of other people don't see that in the work that you do. They just think, oh, can you just do this, do that? But it's a really it can be a stressful space to work. Second is content and material. I know a lot of people, particularly in like a curatorial kind of role, who have had to unpack very dark, stressful, traumatic content in their work. Things around like massacres or family separation, things like that. And fair enough if that's part of the role, but you've got to make sure as an employer that you've got that safety and support around that people know what they're getting into, and ideally spread out across a bit of time. I knew a person in particular who was spending like 5 out of 6 hours of most of their work on like this heavy massacre content. And you can imagine what that does to anyone, even if you didn't have a connection to the stories and the places and the people. But if you've got some type of link to that, it can be crazy heavy. And the fourth is when places have no cultural protocols. And cultural protocols can be, there's a few different ways to go about it, but the best example in this space is Terry Jenke, who some of you may be familiar with, an incredible lawyer and leader, and she's really pioneered this cultural protocol space. We're actually working with her in the coming weeks to build those for Sydney Living Museums, which I'm really excited about. But just things that all staff can get behind and know what their responsibilities are with certain things. I think a lot of staff want to do the right thing, but they just haven't been given the right tools or protocols. So having those things in place so that all your staff can know that they're on the right track. Third is over-demanding. I think this is just something, again, across the sector. In the last few years, this First Nations space has grown and grown and grown. If you could buy stocks in it, it would have gone through the roof. But 5 years ago, it was sort of just, it was getting there. And in the last sort of 12 to 18 months, it's gone like through the roof, which is great. Because I was talking to someone recently about years ago that they had to really search for the cultural events and the programs and things like that. And now there's so many, you gotta pick 1 out of 5, and that's really great. But in terms of an organisation, that over demand to deliver and to keep putting things on can put a real toll on your staff after a while. And you got to think too, as I think leaders of all sort of community and cultural institutions need to think: are we putting things on to look good or to do good? And too often it's the former. And and you can start to see it after a while once you know what to look for. But yeah, just are we focusing on looking good externally, or are we focused on going at the right pace internally? Because not every place is going to go at the same speed. You've got different numbers of staff, you've got different resources. It's okay to go at different levels. But I think it's a bit of you see on that fourth bit, it says treating culture as fashion. It's sort of, a lot of places see, oh, down the road they're doing this, and they got this big grant, and they got this and this, and then you start to feel, I imagine, inadequate and want to put on more and more things to sort of keep up with the Joneses, but in a cultural sense. It's this weird sort of dynamic. But I know that underneath that is still a lot of goodwill and people genuinely caring. We've just got to be careful of those things, because that's how you can drive away staff, or you can sort of stunt the natural growth that you are already on. Fourth is not genuine, which, I've met some of the most amazing people in the museum space and cultural institutions, from all backgrounds, particularly at SLM. I never thought I could work somewhere with such amazing staff and, quite a few here tonight supporting. But I think there are certain places that might not have the right genuine approach to a lot of their cultural engagement. And as staff, you can sort of start to feel that after a while, and community feel that after a while too. And again, I was talking about high stakes. As an institution, you don't want to be known as that sort of place that just puts on things for the sake of it. So I think we need to be more careful. It's funny, you look at risk in a workplace, and if you see a puddle or cords dangling from the roof, it's easy to come by with a clipboard and go, that's unsafe, we need to fix that. But some of these other things, that I'm talking about and unpacking, they're a lot harder to detect, particularly when you might not want to go and detect them. But they're just as unsafe, and they can cause just as many, if not more, problems. And the last couple of things is not listening. Talked before about deep listening, but it means a lot when First Nation staff are heard. It's because if you don't listen, then we're going to close off. We're going to think, why bother? Why open up our heart and soul into the work? I got this sort of analogy. Just bear with me while I get through it. But just imagine with me for a sec a museum with 99% male staff, and you want to bring on a female staff member in a female identified role. And then you want to say we're championing women's causes and women's issues and all this sort of stuff. But you can sort of, that would feel a bit weird, I imagine, right, for a lot of people. But we don't see that when it's in the cultural sense. Now, we don't make up a large percent of the population, so we're probably never going to have majority in the workplace or anything like that. But what I'm just saying is, you can see this discrepancy when, if you're coming in as that one person, and there's all this attention on that one part of your identity, it can be daunting and intimidating. And if you add on all those things that weren't working that I mentioned, it's, again, a recipe for disaster. Now, I'm just going to pause the museum and cultural institution stuff for just a second and talk about a bit of youth wellbeing and mental health, which is really important to me personally. So just a brief story. So in the high school years, I was year 9, year 10, suffering from a whole range of things: loneliness, depression, hanging around bad people, all the perfect ingredients of a year 9 life. And it was very tough times, and it was at a time when mental health wasn't as talked about as it is now. It's much more commonplace and discussed. I still think there needs to be more work for that deeper help and support to be there, but at least surface level, it's being talked about a lot. But back then, we're talking 2009, 2010, there wasn't much there, particularly as a young male, boys don't cry, all this kind of culture, which is still around, but very much back then. I was withdrawing from life completely, and I wasn't going to do it, I don't think, but I was feeling very suicidal. I didn't want to be here anymore. I checked out completely, and I definitely wanted to drop out of school as soon as I could, and I started thinking about dropping out of life. And I remember having this really weird thought that I wish I lived in America because of how easy it would be to access weapons and things like that, just to, like, in a personal sense. That's how much I didn't really want to be around anymore. And a couple of things really changed that and saved that for me. And one of them was a mentoring program, which was run on a university campus at Macquarie Uni. And it would pair university students up with year 9 and 10 kids, and really mentor them to finish school and then to go on and do great things. And I remember being offered by this teacher to go to one of them. And at first I was like, sounds lame, I don't want to go. And he said, it's a day off school, there's a free feed, if it's bad, we won't go again. And I was like, all right, sold. And I went along, not with a lot of hope, but just why not? And I think I had double period math that day, so it made sense. But I went and I loved it. And I went to every single session for the next 2 years. A bit like my nan getting early to the programs, I was getting early to the mentoring because it meant so much to me. And to have someone, I was 15 or so at the time, and to have someone who was 21, 22, supporting you, giving you that positive encouragement, and just someone to talk to, and also we unpack a lot of life skills and things like that, and just more importantly, something to look forward to in the week. In those dark, stormy days, there was that one day a week I could always look forward to. So that was one of the things that saved my schooling and started to save my life. The next, and equally as important, was a speaker came to my school in year 11, and a lot of kids were like, on their phones and not really paying attention at the start, and wasn't even giving this bloke a chance. And I was like, I'll give this guy 10 minutes, I'll see what he has to say. And that 10 minutes turned into, a locked-in 2 hours, and I listened to every word, and a lot of it was around resiliency and building yourself up and setting goals, all that good stuff that young people need more of. Anyway, I ended up buying this guy's book, and let me tell you, I wasn't a book guy. I remember for some of my exams and some of my English classes, how you get a book to read, for your course or semester or whatever. I remember making up quotes in the test about the book we were meant to read. Real smart idea, especially when it was like Shakespeare type stuff. Some of the most well-known, pieces of work. But so suddenly I actively bought a book. I didn't tell many of my friends about it, but that book, just continued that growth that I was experiencing in the session. And then I demolished the book, and then I went to anyone know the big Dimmicks in the city on George Street, beautiful building. But I remember going there, as a Year 11 student, when normally I would go to EB Games or JB Hi-Fi, but suddenly I'm going into this whole new world of books and knowledge, and I suddenly start to see the world of personal development and books around mindset and things like that. And I started to buy them and read them, and it did a complete 180 for my life. And anyway, further along down the track, I graduated high school, and I ended up going to Macquarie Uni as a student. And I was studying, media and a bit of psychology, and I wasn't really that interested in the degree aspect. I was just so happy to be back on campus, being in that environment which had done so much for me as a kid. And then I volunteered to join the Indigenous Outreach Unit at the campus. It was a different program than I was experiencing the year before, but I joined that as a volunteer. And within a couple of sessions, they ended up employing me. The university, started to pay me to run some of the outreach programs. And then I'd go into these schools, and teachers and students would give great feedback. And, shortly after, some of the funding ran out there was like a restructure. One of those beautiful things in these institutions, there's a restructure. So things were on hold, long semester breaks, that sort of thing. But I just wanted to get back to that I wasn't going to wait for some spreadsheets and some meetings and all that stuff to get sorted out over 9 more months. I just went back out there, and a lot of those teachers still had my contact, and we stayed in touch. And anyway, I started going around the schools and developing my own content and my own 1-hour workshops, as well as ongoing mentoring and things like that. And at 19 started Think Successful, which is my business. I say business, it's more of a social enterprise, just focused on doing good in the community and being able to sustain itself. And over those next few years, I reached 25,000 odd students in different capacities through these programs. And again, the feedback was amazing, because there's not enough of this out there. There's a few, and that's great. I think there can't be enough with the things that young people are facing. If you think back to your teenage years, you might have a few nostalgic memories, a few nice things, but a lot of dark times. And if you were to be placed back in it again, I think you'd really remember just how challenging it is, especially in the modern day. It's only gotten more and more challenging. Any parent can attest to that. And being in these schools and being able to teach a lot of the same things that I learned was really important to me. But I just think that young people should be able to access the same world-class personal development that the top CEOs and the top businesses get for their leaders and their employees. It shouldn't be something that people find out 30 years later in life and they go, I wish I learnt this when I was 16, 18. How different my life could have been if I learnt that then. So that's the kind of thing I focus on. Between the ages of 18 and about 23, nearly every dollar that I had that wasn't spent on food and necessities went into my own personal development. So I was training with a lot of the best institutes in the world, a lot of the best speakers and mentors, and I really wanted to take that and then in my own way give that to the young people that needed it, which is what I ended up doing. So we cover a range of things in a general 1-hour presentation, but there's so much to unpack that the hour's never really enough. So we can do follow-up sessions with the students, but there's so much that you can talk about depending on the year group. So year 7 and 8, it's often around that change management. You're going from being the biggest kids in school to being the littlest, and life's changing every single day, and it can be very overwhelming. Year 9 and year 10, for example, is I think where a lot of people sort of go, if they go off the rails, it's often in those years, because those are those middle years where you can't really see the light at the end of the tunnel. You're stuck. You don't have the full freedom of an adult, but you're not getting away with the stuff you were as a kid. It's this weird year 9, year 10 period where most people start to get involved with a lot of those bad things. In year 11 and 12, a lot of it's focused on the future. you know, if you're 16, 17, 18, any family event or gathering you go to, you always get these questions. Oh, what are you doing after school? What are you doing? And unless you have the perfect answer, and off the top, it can be very a source of anxiety for a lot of young people. And people rush into things that their parents just want them to do, or safe options. And a big part of this program is getting young people to define success on their terms, not what their teacher, their school, their family want for them, but to start to develop their own inner voice and what that means for them. And there's sort of 5 levels in a general hour that we go through, but the first is the importance and the benefits. Because a lot of young people, when you can tell them how what you're going to teach them is going to benefit them in life, they'll genuinely listen. They often switch off when it's crazy algebra that they know that they're not going to use later in life. But when they know that it's important, and when they see how it's been important for someone else, suddenly they're locked in. And there's a lot to unpack around mindset, thoughts, emotions, and beliefs, and why they're important, why they're the catalyst for a lot of our actions, and how you can be the source of them. A lot of young people, they're getting told things all day. Their teachers, their parents, everyone's telling them what to do, what to think. But to start to develop that from within is one of the most powerful things you can do. And then third, you look into the tools, techniques, and strategies. So what is, some of the best CEOs, how do they structure their work? How do they plan their life? And obviously, you don't have to model that as a Year 9 kid or a Year 10 kid, but just to get a little bit of inspiration of, there's other ways of thinking, working, and planning for the future. And then looking at resiliency and having a support network. So, who are the people around you that can support you as you start to better yourself and start to go on a new journey? And sometimes that might just be you, sadly. And how can you be, your best supporter? How can you look after yourself and have that self-care? And then future thinking. So really looking at the future. I think when you have hopes and dreams and a bright vision for the future, it helps you in the present deal with a whole lot of things that you might have not otherwise been able to deal with. And the way we make money and the way we will continue to exist is, schools can book us obviously and just pay for a workshop, but also building other things. So I'm looking at collaborating with different companies and organisations that care about young people and want to support them. And as things successful, our goal is to help young people across the state, across the country, but to have a very significant focus on young First Nations people. So helping all young students, but having a real area of focus as well. I'm on Patreon, if anyone's familiar with Patreon. If you listen to podcasts or YouTube creators, they probably have a Patreon to support. I'm not trying to sell nothing, don't worry. It's just a lot of people, they resonate with the things that I've been talking about tonight, and they want to get involved and they want to support, but they might not be able to in their line of work, or they just want to get behind something that's going to make a difference. So set that up last night, so we're heading in the right direction. To stay in touch, I literally got back on social media early this morning. I've been off it for about 4 years. I'm not a big fan of it, but I realised, to do this kind of work and to expand and to reach more people, I've got to tap into it. So feel free to follow me on there. I've got about 6 followers at the moment, so not quite an influencer just yet. And then I've got 2 email addresses there for anyone that's interested in working with me. I've got the SLM email if you want to talk museums, cultural institutions, First Nations strategy. Always happy to talk and share. And then the Think Successful email if anyone's interested in some of the things that we've got going on next year and reaching a lot of young people. Thank you very much for your time and listening. And I think, we've got time for some questions.
So we have one question online. What are some strategies you can use to help encourage people within who may be resistant to cultural change to embrace the First Nations focus and led program?
I think it's so big now. As we were talking before about the space that we're in culturally now, that we're just heading in that direction. So it's sort of like for those people with resistance, it's come along for the ride, or you might fall behind a little bit, because we've got such a movement now that it's not going to go away. So, but I also think that there's a lot of things to learn. I know a lot of people who in their mid-50s, and for the first 50 years of their life, they didn't have very positive views about culture, like our First Nations cultures. They just didn't understand. They weren't given the tools at school or growing up, or maybe they've never really worked with any type of community group or any elders. So for the ones that are a bit resistant but not evil, you can bring them along for the ride, and that's what I love to do, and to connect people. And there's so much for everyone to enjoy about our culture. That's one of the things about the strategy. It's something that I want to build pride in within everyone. No matter where what your family's history is. We all live and work here. It's quite a special history we have. Obviously, there's some very dark chapters within it, but there's a lot of beauty to enjoy for everyone to tap into. Anyone online, feel free to send through some questions. But any questions from the room?
Hello, Hayden.
Hey.
Thank you so much for your talk. So inspirational. I'm just wondering from your experience. Firstly, thank you for sharing your journey. It's really impactful. Just wondering from your experience at the museum, and then also in Think Successful, are you seeing young Indigenous kids coming through that are feeling more pride in their Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander identity? Like you talked about your grandmother's journey, obviously, and your own journey, and I'm just wondering whether you're seeing that change happening. Yeah,
massively. It's one of the most beautiful things to see. It's one of those things that kids used to hide, and now it's one of the first things that can come out of their mouth when you meet them, and that's such a beautiful shift. And it's happened in a fairly short amount of time, which is a real positive. And like I said, there's quite a few things to unpack tonight about what's not working, but there is so much more that's working. That I spent 3 hours talking about all the positives out there, but it's good to be aware of the things that aren't, so you can be aware and correct that. But for young people, it's so good to see, and you see even in young childcare, and that the kids are learning language, and even non-Aboriginal youngsters, they're getting behind it, and it's just a part of their learning, and they're growing up now. Whereas many years ago, even when I was at school, I think we spent about 2 weeks on it, then like 4 years on ancient Rome, But now it's becoming a part of people's upbringing, which is beautiful. Any other questions?
Is the government in schools moving towards that education? Do you know, or is that something that you prefer?
Yeah, there's quite a lot happening. Like there's Aboriginal units of study, which a lot of kids are being able to do, which is great, like an elective. I never had that. I was stuck doing cooking, and still can't cook. Yeah. But it would have been great to have studied that when I was a kid. But I still take a lot of happiness seeing kids learning that now. But I think even just teachers are becoming better aware of all other subjects too. And when the teachers are aware, I think that sets a good example for the kids. And when teachers don't let things slide, or little comments or things like that, I think that's a sort of a quiet point of power that is really good. Cool. Any more questions?
When you're partnering with different organisations and building partnerships, I'm curious about when it is positive and it does work, when you're working with a company or an organisation that's not First Nations led. What are some of the qualities that you're seeing in those partnerships that are positive?
Yeah, so I've got a few examples. In terms of the business side of things, I'm just starting those conversations with a lot of those companies. But on the SLM and the museum side, I've seen a lot of donations and support given by different companies that have allowed us to do great things. I think it works best when whoever's giving that support gets engaged too. So it's not just a written check, or it's not just tax write-off or whatever, but it's something that they're passionate about and they want to come along to as well. But I think in terms of not working, I think something that companies or leadership teams around need to realise is that things might not always be perfect in this space. We're dealing with, particularly this part of Sydney is often referred to as ground zero by a lot of community, because this is where so much of that first impact has happened. So what you'll actually see is, sadly, large disagreements amongst communities across Sydney, and disputes around history and this and that. But people need to realise that we're still recovering from all the damage that was done, and this isn't the normal state of things. But yeah, it's not always going to be perfect, particularly when you've got that cultural weight to it. But it's worth spending time and resources to get as close to perfect down the track. Any other questions, or I'll hand over to Drew to wish us farewell. I'll be outside in the foyer. Oh, one more question.
You talked about the importance of having different cultural protocols, and I was just wondering if you could talk to any examples of that, obviously potentially with a non-Indigenous organisation having an acknowledgement of country and stuff like that, and reconciliation plans and doing stuff. But yeah, any other kind of examples that are kind of people should start doing, basically.
Yeah, I think the best thing is to engage someone, or I mentioned Terry Jenke earlier, but someone with that deep knowledge that they can come in and really look at what you're dealing with in your work, and they can really they have this beautiful mind of being able to pick apart and see where the dangerous parts are, that you need to develop those protocols. Obviously for museums and archives and galleries and things like that, a lot of the material itself or the properties and places themselves can be that point of challenge. But there's, depending on where you are, they've got their own unique set of challenges. But in terms of acknowledgement of country, I think it works best when it's genuine and it sort of flows. And one of the things that I'm working on over the next 12 months is, with all of our staff, developing their own acknowledgement of country. So you're not just hearing the same couple of lines all the time, and it's a bit more natural and a bit more, but also having those pre-written ones if staff aren't yet comfortable to just take the leap and develop their own. Hopefully that's touched on an answer for you.
Hayden, obviously as a country we're made up now of many people from many different nations and different cultures. When you go into schools, or you get school groups coming into Sydney Living Museums, which are predominantly from a different culture, so I don't know, a Vietnamese school, kids from a Vietnamese area or a Lebanese area or a Chinese area or Indian area, how do you find the discussion about First Nations people and culture is received when those people are also dealing with their interaction with the Australian culture, and there's that whole thing about, do they want to be Australian or do they want to preserve their own heritage? How is it embraced? Is it kind of, I just can't deal with that? What's your insights?
Absolutely, it's a great question, and something that I've been thinking about as well. One of the examples I'll just touch on is when I worked at the Rocks Discovery Museum just down the road, a beautiful smaller museum that I recommend for everyone. But one of the parts of my roles was to do tours around the peninsula, around the harbour, and we taught language, talked about first contact and things like that. But we'd have school groups from all across Sydney, sometimes touring from all over the country, and yes, certain school groups with very distinct cultural segments. And one of the best ways was sometimes one of the kids can sort of see a similarity in how some of our people were treated into some of their own history. And I think that's even though you're not necessarily talking about nice things, that's a nice way to bridge a bit of a connection. I've got a colleague who's Polish background, and we talk quite a bit. And you'd be amazed at some of the similarities from my cultural knowledge and histories and hers. And I think it's really nice when you have that overlap. But yeah, I think kids are getting more and more into it, and there's just more respect. I'm seeing less jokes and mucking around about it. There's that more deeper respect that they're showing, which is good.
It's kind of on that a little bit, but I think you spoke a little about how in the past 12 to 18 months there's kind of been this increased demand for cultural festivals or anything. Do you think that it's a COVID thing? We're coming out of COVID, so we're actually just having generally more events, or do you think it speaks to broader cultural changes?
It's a great question. I think both for sure, because COVID, everyone cooped up for 2 years, and all these things we had planned we couldn't do. So then it's like this rocket that launches while we all came back, and instead of doing a general set of great things, a lot of places at 500% of what they should be doing. So I think it's that, and hopefully that sort of eases out a bit, because I think when you rush and you do too much, there's too many errors, and it's high stakes, like I said. But also, part of the general culture and where we're heading. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Drew, but I'll be around for a bit. And thanks again. Get home safe.
Thank you, Hayden. That was wonderful. Thank you for your knowledge, guidance, and just general information. So our next First Nations speaker series will be held at Elizabeth Bay House on Wednesday, the 5th of October, with a talk from Leah Louis Ceviche. And so the registration for that is now open, but thank you again, Hayden.